So we're shifting gears now. We're shifting into a time for us to take everything we've talked about over the last several months, and we're going to start asking a new question, and that is, so what? All right, now that we've had some really fantastic study of the wisdom literature and the wisdom tradition of the scriptures, what do we do with that? What difference does it make? And so today we're starting that with a discussion on living wisely in our deeply divided society. We figure, let's just jump right in, right? Let's not start with anything easy. And so I'm excited to have with us this morning Kathy Lewis, Vince Connery, and Mother Sue. So take just a second, guys. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves for us in just a second here. But when you think about our deeply divided society, think about the ways in which we divide ourselves up and get entrenched in our tribes. Obviously, politics is an easy one. Gender, income. Many of us right now have strong feelings about daylight savings time. So we've got lots of different ways that we divide up in society. And it often causes more trouble than it does bridge gaps. So we want to talk about how to bring the wisdom of God and the wisdom of living to bear on being human in these deeply divided times and where we go with that. So as we get started, just take a second, guys, introduce yourselves. Most of us probably know who you guys are, but just so we get a good sense of who we're dealing with this morning.
Sure.
Start us off.
Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see everybody here on a time-weird day and a weather-weird day. I was walking my dog this morning. I was like, are you kidding me? This is unbelievably ridiculous, but okay, here we are. I'm so glad we're doing this topic, by the way, because this is something I've observed over 23 years doing a daily talk radio show. So when we started this show in 1996, there certainly were talk radio shows out there, but there were not the proliferation that there are now. And we really didn't, I don't think, have as much of the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news culture that we do now. And that has really shaped so much. So it's just me and Rush Limbaugh, right? He won, just to be clear. Yeah, so I think that has really influenced where we are right now, this 24/7 news culture. And the other thing I think that's influenced it significantly is the ability for us to burrow down into our small subterranean communities with people who think exactly like we do. Then when we pop our head up and we encounter somebody who doesn't think the way we do, we are shocked and horrified, and we just cannot imagine that we are inhabiting the same earth space with those people. So we never knew that before, I don't think, to the degree that we do now. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that is really troubling to me is the simplicity with which we approach this. A colleague of mine just did a study at Christopher Newport University where she said, what is it that is most likely to send people to the polls or away from the polls? And what she found is it is not issues. So all of us who are sitting there talking about issues, that's not what's doing it. It's negative partisanship. So in other words, if I'm on the red team, I'll use different colors. If I'm on the yellow team, I really hate people on the orange team. So I'm not really oriented necessarily around liking my yellow team or around the issues that are important to yellow team people. I'm really oriented around hating the orange team, and that's very disturbing.
Yeah. I think Kathy said on some really important things we're going to come back to in just a few minutes. Pretty good things. Vince, could you give us a little intro?
Sure. Vince Connery, and in response to this question, I just happened to be walking through the locker room at the Y yesterday, and there was a news program on, and there was a conversation, and a phrase came up that really kind of the toast popped up for me. They were talking about the current climate of public discourse and described it as the Outrage Olympics. And that really, that strikes me as true, that a lot of public discussion about things is not a dialogue. It's a platform to express outrage on all sides of issues. So get it off your chest and move on, but it doesn't move us forward at all. So I think that's worth considering as something we got to get past.
Sure. Vince, can you share with the group a little bit about your background and because most people may not know kind of where you come from, a sense of why we asked you to be here, because you
Why did you? Well,
you have a very pastoral background.
Yeah, I was ordained a Roman Catholic priest in 1976, and I was in active ministry for 12 years, and then I resigned from active ministry. After that, I spent about 25 years as a mental health social worker, supporting military families, and retired a year and a half ago. And I'm also a part-time real estate agent, which is, you use a lot of social work in that. Probably more than you do in social work.
So part of why I wanted Vince on the panel was just because of his pastoral background and his work in these areas. Vince has had a lot of opportunity dealing with some of these situations, and I think has a lot of wisdom to give us as well. Mother Sue?
Oh, well, you can see I'm a day late, a dollar short this morning. Glad to be here, though. I'm amazed that so many people made it on time, which I didn't. So I think probably the greatest thing that I notice is a lack of trust, lack of mutual trust, that we just don't think that the other person is going to really like us or believe us, and we're all pushing our own, like Kathy was talking about, being in our own bubbles and being amazed when seeing how hard it is to get out of the bubbles. So I think one reason why I'm on the panel is because of my background as a therapist. I also went to social work school, but to become a psychotherapist and become a young analyst. So I think that that one of the things that we have to somehow do is stop seeing, put it this way, seeing the mote in the other person's eye when we have a log in our own. And it's not easy. And one of my favorite writings by Jung is talking about the shadow. So I'll probably bring that up a little bit more. It might be helpful for us.
Great, thank you. So the people on our panel this morning have had a lot of experience dealing with living in this divided culture and trying to navigate conversation and dialogue in the midst of some deep division. So I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning. I've got some questions I want to ask. I want to give them a chance to not only answer questions, but give us some of their own wisdom, and give you a chance to jump in at some point as well. One rule I have this morning is that we want to keep the exchanges relatively short. This is not an opportunity for any of the four of us or anyone out here to get on a soapbox for half an hour and preach. If you want to preach, there are opportunities for that. This is more about dialogue, so we're just let's keep things short so we can keep moving through this. And I'm going to start with this. Author Brene Brown wrote recently that the world feels heartbroken to me right now, she says. We've sorted ourselves into factions based on our politics and ideology. We've turned away from one another and toward blame and rage. We're lonely and untethered and scared. And I want to ask you guys, is that how you see the world today? Lonely and untethered and scared? Just kind of diagnose the situation for us.
I think that's really accurate. I really appreciate what Mo Sue said too about trust, because that, it seems to me, is at the heart of this all too. And so when all you know about somebody is what you see on the television, what you read in social media. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've certainly felt compelled to engage in arguments with complete and total strangers with the ultimate goal of changing their life history forever. It does not work. Yes, I think that's exactly what it is. And what I find is, I notice it in the listener response to our show. So before 2.5–3 years ago, if somebody had a problem with what you put on the show, or if they wanted to suggest that, very nicely, that there might be another voice you want to add next time, whatever, that's what they would say. They'd say, hey, really love the show. great job, love what you're doing. Next time you talk about this, you might want to consider including this person. I understand they have a very interesting perspective. Here's a link to learn more. Perfect. Love that. Well, now it's, how could you not, do you do any, I literally had a guy write and say, do you do any research at all for your show? Or do you just open the mic 20 seconds before you go on and start talking, start blabbing? Was the word blabbing. So this trust thing is really important, because I think what it is if you're not on the same page, or people hear something they don't like, they use that moment to not trust you forever. And it's all really ratcheted up. Example, Wednesday, I guess it was Wednesday. The other complicator here is that there are a lot of bots out there on social media, and we've heard a lot about that. Well, somebody let us know privately they think there are a couple of bots operating on our page. So bots are just sort of fake social media accounts where people say really inflammatory things. And I looked at these, my team looked at these inflammatory things and thought, yeah, I think this guy's a bot. Checked out his social media thing, no friends, got to be a bot. So they blocked him. Well, apparently he's not a bot. As he let me know, when he said that, first of all, he blamed me personally for this. Very alarming, of course. I personally did this to him. And I am racist, just to be very clear about that, apparently. And I'm really glad you know this, Vince. He said he was going to be in all the churches this weekend, and I was going to be the topic of conversation. So just going to give you that heads up right now. Jesus is going to be sad about that, but I'm apparently going to be the topic of all conversation in churches this weekend, and he was coming to get me.
Well, there you have it.
So, I mean, this is what's going on, and it's very dangerous. Every time that happens, I will tell you that for me, it triggered a call to the police, because he said he was coming to get me. This is where we are right now. And so every time something like that happens, it's not only bad for our overall discourse, it is personally frightening. And if I send you out with no other message today, it is every time you agree with somebody who says, #fake news, or the media is awful, or CNN's terrible, whatever it is, you put each and every one of us in danger. You put me in danger, you put David Allen, who's a member of this church, in danger. It is not just Washington correspondents, at least every one of us gets put in danger, because we don't know when somebody's going to decide that we're the enemy of the people they can help out.
So I want to ask you to follow up on that, because Kathy brings up some good points, and I just, with your experience and your therapy work, talk about the role of language for us, and the role of how our words matter and what they say. How does that further entrench our divisions, or how do we heal divisions with the way we talk about people and learn to trust, just based on your comment as well?
I think that we all know the kind of words that come out of our mouths when we're angry, things we've been thinking. And we say, and then we may be embarrassed or not, but or apologize later. But I think that's happening a lot. And one of the things that I think that we have to learn to do is to reflect, be able to reflect and take a breath and think about what we're about to say, be more deliberate, and consider how this will affect the other person. Now, you want me to talk about if you spot it, you got it?
Sure, yeah.
Well, so my oldest son, who trained to be a life coach, said if you spot it, you got it. And that's really good shorthand for a lot of Jungian fancy talk. So if you, so that one way I think that we all can help in the discourse is if ever we have a really strong reaction to somebody else, especially if it makes us, we get very upset about what they're doing, or the way they are, the way they sit, the way they stand, well, anything about what they're saying, is that we have to take that as an indication that if we have a lot of reaction to it, emotional reaction to it, we've got it too. And this kind of helps, I think, settle us down a little bit. Because how do you speak to one another without just seeing what you think they are, rather than listening and finding out and asking, being interested in the other person. So I think in therapy, one of the things that people learn to do is to reflect and see themselves more honestly and compassionately. And I think that somehow, if we see how something that upsets us, I can remember one time somebody said, describe your shadow. And I started describing Dottie Duke, because she's the wife of the astronaut Charlie Duke. And I just started describing her. She was very perky, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff that I really didn't like very much, but I liked her, but still, I was doing the shadow part. And they all started laughing in this little study group, Center Point study group back in the 70s. And they just started laughing. You guess why? It sounded just like me, evidently, the way they saw me. And that was a big eye-opener for me.
Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. That's a helpful reminder. You mentioned earlier about seeing the speck in your own eye and the beam, the log in the other person's eye, and it is, or the other way around.
The other way around, but it's a way to get in touch with what's real out there. I mean, the other person, if you project something on another person, meaning you see some of your stuff in them, they've got to have a hook to hang it on. They have to have something in them that says, that's true, it's reality, but it's a great way to learn how to chess your cards and learn how to navigate in the world with more compassion, I think.
Well, let me ask, Vince, let me ask you this too. Compassion seems to be a theme that's coming up, even though I think it's the first time the word's been used. I'm hearing a lot about trust and empathy and compassion. How do we develop that? I mean, how do we learn to see people as human instead of as other?
Well, I got into real estate in 2006 and rode it all the way to the bottom. But along the way, I learned some pretty good things. And one of the most compelling for me was it was a workshop about engaging people, and it said, if you really want to engage people, the first thing you have got to be able to do is to recognize their pain points. And that really stuck with me, because, going back to the Outrage Olympics, if all we're doing is coming at each other with our stump speech, we're talking past each other. So I do think the beginning of compassion is listening and trying to listen on a deeper level. And to begin with that, I think if someone experiences that you really hear what is their underlying concern, their deepest concern, their pain points, that's a good place to really connect and can do better things.
Captain.
Can I give
Yeah.
some example of a pain point, for instance?
Well, it could be anything. It could be, I'm underwater in my mortgage.
Yeah.
Sue, in our context that we're talking about, these deep divisions, what do you see as people's pain points that drive some of this animosity and this deep entrenched in our own place? What are the pain points that you see that drive?
I think the degree of the fear. Golly, I think we're all scared.
What are we scared of?
Well, we're scared of being killed. We're scared of, for people who are out front, like Kathy, we're afraid of being dismissed. We're afraid of just chaos, because the social order seems fragmented. So I think that, so we don't know quite how to, the old mores, that fancy social studies word, sociology word, mores, M-O-R-E-S, are different. And so the society is breaking up in the old ways, and so we're all scared because we don't know kind of how we fit, what we're supposed to do. And we don't know, like, one day somebody was really nice, anyway, somebody I'd known for a long time, is a social justice Catholic, and I found out that she and I were in different political parties, and at one time that would not have meant a big deal. But I had to kind of go, oh, I have to be careful here. Now why? She's the same person. So I think there's a lot of just fear.
By the way, we're going to get to questions from you guys in just a minute, so hang on to those. Don't forget them. Write them on the back of your hand if you need to. We'll get to questions in just a few minutes. Kathy, what drives this? What drives this? Let me ask that a different way, because I have a place I want to go here. Technologically, how has the rise of social media changed or contributed to this?
In exponential ways, because we can get in our little subterranean groups of people who think like us, and there's thousands and millions of them in the world, and when we find out that, we're really excited. The other thing I think that has been very damaging, I think so, I'm a big fan of social media. Don't take any of this to mean that I'm not. I just think that, like everything in life, it's a tool, there's good things you can do and bad things you can do with it. It propagates untruth. So if I say something that is absolutely not true, I can share it with my 5,000 close and intimate friends on my Facebook page, and they will share it with their 5,000 close and intimate friends, and before you know it, you've got a runaway train that's very hard to dial back.
So it maximizes fear.
Absolutely. And if your message is around fear, now you've just got everybody good and gemmed up.
All right, so let me ask the second question then. This is, any of you can jump in here. So social media tends to amplify that, but what about outside of the technological world? I mean, is that the only issue that's driving? Is that the only thing that's driving this kind of amped up fear and division? Or what else is it that's causing us to live in this constant state of fear and further drilling down into our subgroups? Because you've mentioned this several times, Kathy, is that it's not just that we have Republican, Democrat, Independent, or Protestant, Catholic, or whatever the case is. We've drilled down very specifically into I'm this kind of political person who does this and that and the other, and if you're not all those things, then something's wrong with you.
Well, we don't have Walter Cronkite anymore. CBS do all listening. I think that's a big factor. I don't know if you call that technology. Is that technology?
Well, I'm saying even outside of technology, what drives this kind of further demarcation of ourselves in these smaller groups?
Addiction.
Sue or Vince, you want to speak into that?
Well, I don't know. I think it's the 24-hour drumbeat, which is technology, but it's always there behind you, and people got to say something, so they just keep saying the same thing over and over again and calling it breaking news.
It's the natural development of the next story.
I mean, you can see it when we're in the middle of these things where they have to talk and talk and talk for 24 hours a day. A celebrity dies and it's like relief. We can go get something out of the can and put it on TV and take a break. But to me, that's the downside of the constant, noise
Sure.
that's out there all the time.
Sure. It seems like culturally one of the shifts that's happened is it used to be if you had a point you wanted to make, you had to research and write and publish, and people had to read and digest and research and respond, and there was a great deal of time that allowed us space to dialogue, perhaps in healthier ways. And then what we've done is we've just compressed the whole process into literally a matter of seconds. So that now if I have something I want to say, I can say it like that. And if you want to respond, you can respond like that. In less than 60 seconds, we've divided ourselves. And so figuring out, I think part of wisdom, this is, I'm transitioning a little bit here, but where we're going to go now, I'm going to let you guys ask some questions, and then where we're going to head next is, okay, so what do we do about it? So how do we live wisely to counteract that? Well, let's start by asking some questions. What questions do you guys have for our panel around this topic? Yes?
So right off the bat, I certainly agree with Kathy and others on certainly the 24-hour media thing, but we're also losing sources on the other end. Before we depended on TV and radio for that instantaneous information, a car accident down the street, a church burning, or whatever. But then we also had newspapers, Time magazine, or whatever, that then went back a week later and did, shall we say, the more thoughtful collages of what you thought was going on. Well, that end of the market has disappeared, mainly because we're not paying for it any longer.
So your concern is that we've lost even some of the cultural communication pillars that give us an opportunity for
Has
thoughtful
anybody in this
reflection.
room ever read David Brooks's Social Animal? Then there's a predisposition within us to be sort of conservative or liberal. Now, like anything else that's genetic, or most things that are genetic, certainly mentally genetic, we're born with a certain brain structure, but it can be overwritten with experience.
So John, I think what's interesting about what you're saying, and I think you nailed something really important there. When you said we don't have these reflective opportunities anymore, we don't. You're 100% right on that. What we do have, and what is run amok right now, is this ability to reduce everything to one or two words.
Yeah.
And that makes it very easy for us to think, well, am I in that camp or am I not? I mean, I frankly see this happening right now in Virginia with this, with the situation with Governor Northam and what happened on the 1st of February. That has been reduced to either resign or don't resign. Okay, I think there's a lot deeper conversation we can and should be having. There's a conversation about at what point are we going to, as a culture, figure out when something matters that somebody did, or when it was in the past, or when it wasn't in the past. How are we going to know what that says about that person and whether people have the ability to evolve? That's one thing. Number two, what are we going to do about systemic issues, which have very much been raised of racism in this current conversation? And to me, both of those are, that's just only two of them, by the way. There's the old other issue of what it means to run for office. I mean, do you want to run for office in an atmosphere in which your life can fall apart in 24 hours? I don't know. I think that's probably going to be causing some people to sit and think about that a little bit more. So there are all kinds of really deep and important questions this raises for us, but it's being reduced to resign or don't resign.
So that sounds to me
Trevor
like
Noah one more thing.
challenges here.
Trevor Noah yesterday had a thing where he did the news over something where Obama was famous for when he entered office getting two colors of suit, so that in the morning you didn't have to make a decision, and the idea was that later on in the day you made better decisions. Anyhow, one day apparently he walked into a conference with a gray suit instead of his typical colors, and the media went nuts.
Yeah, we were starting for pictures,
It's the famous tan suit.
But I just, this is where I refer back to.
Though, is that our loss of the ability to nuance.
Exactly, yes.
So
Nuance, yes.
we got, just as an example, and I'm not going to mention the person by name just because I don't want to give them any more airtime, but there's a very well-known politician with a TV show and other things who tweeted yesterday something about abortion. Now, abortion is an issue that people feel very strongly about one way or the other. But his comment was something along the lines of, when are Democrats going to, get their head out of the sand and realize essentially that they're murdering babies, okay? So the whole conversation becomes either you value the rights of women and women's choices, or you murder babies. And there's nothing in between. And it's not just the abortion issue. Every issue we come across seems to be either you're a racist governor and you need to resign, or you're not and you need to stay in office, and there's nothing in between. And you mentioned
Black
systemic
and white
issues.
thinking.
Right, and you mentioned systemic issues. How do we address systemic issues in a Twitter culture?
Okay, that's a great question, because I think this is what we all need to do. This is what I'm trying to do now. It's a little social experiment I'm underway with. I have started to try to respond to people who have these one-word kind of things. And it's an experiment. And I will ask them, why do you feel that way? Because I want to kind of understand that better. What is it that has led you to that conclusion? Sometimes it's something, I always think every caller has a kernel of truth and value in that call. I believe that, couldn't do what I do if I didn't believe that. I really believe that. My job, and sometimes it's an archaeological dig, is to get down to find out what that is, and then we start there, and then we build out from there. I started trying to do this in social media, so if it's, the one word, this is sort of the meme kind of thing. I just ask, why do you feel that way? What formed you? Because people's opinions are formed by how they grew up, where they grew up, what experiences they've had. People are complex beings, and I always want to know how they got formed.
Yeah, sure.
So that to me is a great way to push back against that, is to, well, why do you think that? How did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah.
What
And that's showing interest too.
Yeah, and they're usually
not
shocked.
pushing back.
Right, they're usually shocked first of all.
Let me
But you
ask-
learn some interesting things.
Let me ask you guys, so if we're in a conversation and we're disagreeing on something, and I stop and ask you, why do you feel that way? How does that make you feel? Like, when I ask you that question,
That's perfectly fine.
do you feel valued? Do you feel heard?
Or
It seems to me, if you were to ask me, if we're having a conversation, and you say, why do you feel that way? I'm gonna feel like, hey, they care about what's important to me,
Well, you
as
gotta be
opposed
careful
to.
about the
tone
word,
has a lot to do with it.
you gotta be careful about the word why.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Or
Because,
whichever word you want to use.
well, because I think why automatically triggers a defensiveness in terms of why did you do this? Immediately you have to justify. So one of the things I was taught in my training, and I'm not as successful with it as I wish I could be,
Strengths of child psychiatrist.
is when I want to ask the word why, the kernel in me is that's useful information. Can I find a different who, what, where, when, following where Kathy was coming from? And then similarly, one of the other simplistic, but for me was very effective, when I have to do really severe anger work, if I can touch the person that I'm doing that with, I maintain my connection rather than use the intensity of that anger to keep us separate. So that it's a very concrete way that, if I'm sitting there with my husband David, and boy, you have really gotten me whatever today. If I do that from across the room, that polarizes, where, we need to have a real talk because I'm really upset about this today. And I have my hand on a shoulder or a leg. And again, that can be misconstrued, so we've got to be careful with. But it helps me to remember that I have a connection so that the anger becomes a way of resolving an issue rather than licing and keeping it active.
So I have to tell you, last weekend, my son just turned 13 yesterday. For his birthday, we wanted, thank you for all your sympathy. We're looking forward to it. But last weekend, for his birthday, he wanted to go see a Major League Soccer game. So we went up to DC and watched DC United play Atlanta United. And as we were going to our seats, I started up the walkway, and there was a staff person there talking to a gentleman, and I didn't want to interrupt them, so I just started to kind of squeeze by. And she steps in front of me and says, "I'm sorry, I need to see your ticket." And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm just going right here." The gentleman turns to me and says, "Why don't you wait in line like everyone else?" Just like that. There is no, it's literally just him and her and me and my son. And I said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "I didn't know she needed to see my ticket. I wasn't trying to cut in front of you. I'm sorry about that." And what you said, so I just do a little tap on the shoulder because that touch often calms things down. You don't have to touch me. Okay. Step aside. Typically, you're right? Good.
But the important point, though, it's somebody you're already in relationship. I think in this culture, that's really important.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, yeah, because people can really.
And now I know, yes.
Well, like Kathy and his situation, the media now, we're impersonal. I mean, it's easy to get angry over the, and immediately say something to a person and not recognize their body language effect that comment had on them. Whereas, like you said, if you asked us this question, well, we're here. We're in your presence. We can read your body language. We can know you're sincere about the question. But on the computer, oh no, they can care less. They don't see how they react, how that comment has affected you.
Yeah, very good.
So true. I guess this kind of goes with that and the kind of 24-hour news cycles thing. I guess the benefit of that, kind of coming at it from the other angle, is that you don't have to engage constantly, is that you can come back to it with something like the internet. You can come back to it or leave out or stay away from it however much or however little you want. And so, in addition, because they're churning it out constantly, their opinions tend to be devalued in a way. And so that also enables you room to say things without people really saying, does that matter? Because people are talking constantly. And so, you automatically lessen, because the greater volume accords less value to individual statements, generally speaking, I would think.
I think that's a lot of wisdom right there, actually, is just this concept of it doesn't matter that we have a 24-hour news cycle or a constant Twitter feed or Facebook feed. That doesn't mean we have to respond to everything, right? You can see someone be wrong on the internet and let it go, I promise, right? I find, for me, I don't know if you find this, sometimes writing out my response and then deleting it just makes a big difference. I never actually hitting the send button. Let's see if we can turn the corner here too. We're going to take some more questions, but let's start, because we don't have a whole lot of time left. We want to get to, so what do we do? How do we fix this? But let's try to take a couple more questions.
One of the things that bothers me, of course, is that our values are being shattered in this process. But also, I live in community, and it's just very, very interesting. How do we keep people loving one another when they don't agree and they see each other every day? So, that's a whole other deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is a great concern of mine, and I don't know how to handle it, but at my age, and most of us are up there ways, what's happened to truth? And what bothers me is this younger generation and a lot of the older people get their news from social media. They're not reading newspapers or Time magazine, oftentimes, and that is a real concern of mine, is truth. And I wonder if anyone can make me feel a little better about it. What can we do about that? So many things are not true that they're hearing and reading.
Can you guys address just briefly the role of, this is unnecessarily vague, can you address the role of truth in our divisiveness? Because I hear this come up a lot. We hear fake news a lot, but what is the role of truth in our divisions and healing those divisions? Is it simply we need better facts? Is it simply, because you were telling us earlier, Kathy, that's not the case. It's not, people don't go to the polls simply over the issues and the facts. So is this the issue? What do we do about that?
My own observation about truth, and boy, is it a casualty at the moment. I am not going to convince you, if we are strangers on Facebook, that my truth is right and your truth is wrong. So the way I've sort of come to this is to decide to prioritize personal relationships, because that's the best chance you and I have of saying, hey, well, here's what I understand about this, and here's what I understand about this, and best chance we have of noodling that out and coming to some agreement about that is face-to-face. And so in my own life, that's what I've sort of tried to do. What you said about being online and you don't have to respond, I feel an overwhelming, compelling need to respond. So I'm trying really hard to back away from that and say, that's just really a waste of my time and energy. Now, I've decided also to prioritize a couple of issues that I really care about. I'm a Virginian, I love this state. I hate what's happened to us over the last month, so I am responding on that question, because I think we have allowed that to kind of go to a bad place. But generally speaking, my recommendation for how we deal with this is to prioritize personal relationships. Because when you sit down and do things, I think you said, Paul, you know, when you can see somebody's eyes and body language, you can see where they're coming from. And if they make what a friend of mine calls a naive mistake, you know, they make a naive mistake, then you can see, oh, well, they didn't really mean that. One of the other things I've learned of doing a talk show is that sometimes people will say things that just come out wrong. And it's not a reflection of who they are, whatever. And to give them an opportunity to say, I want to ask you more about that. Can you unpack that a little bit? Can you help me understand that? Because sometimes when people are given a second shot to come at it, they communicate it better. But if we just take that first thing they said and decide that we are now going to judge everything we know about them on the basis of what was a naive offense, you know, we really endanger ourselves.
Yeah, Sue.
Well, I wonder whether seeking the truth with a capital T helps at all. And I think that it could be their truth. I guess I'm a relativist, and my son, one of my sons says I dither too much, so, you know, but I think I agree. I think that Kathy has hit the heart of it, that to deal in relationship and let the big truth with a capital T go, because
Doesn't get you.
It just
yeah,
doesn't get you.
it does. Yeah, it just makes you frustrated as heck and upset. And I really like that. It's like you're diving under, Kathy. It's like you're diving under the big T, truth, and all the stuff up here, he said, she said, and you're diving under and getting into an I-thou relationship like Martin Buber talks about, not I-it.
All right, so real quickly, Angelica, you had a question or comment?
I think it's an example that supports what both Kathy and Mother Sue have said, which relates to how we build a personal connection with people who are just on the other side of a truth issue. We were recently in Florida connecting with an old fraternity brother of Henry's, and it was probably 50 years since he'd had any connection with this dog. But they were absolutely lovely people, love their dog, nice little condo, they put us up overnight in Florida, lovely dinner out, and as we got to talking that first afternoon, I said, you know, one of the things that really concerns me about my children, grandchildren, is the world they're going to live in, the environment they're going to live in. And she said, oh, you know, I was just recently talking with this woman who was just drummed out of the science corps because she just had alternative views. I said, oh, well, here we are. We have a denier here. And so we kind of morphed on back to the dogs and the children. So we really wanted to establish a connection, but I really wasn't willing to risk the conversation on the facts. And I think sometimes you have to say what's more important.
That's difficult sometimes, but ultimately the relationship can be more valuable. Yeah. We've got lots of questions, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to hold on to those because this clock is not right. We've only got a couple minutes left, and what I'd like to do in our closing minutes is have you guys share with us, if you could share with us one little proverb, one little nugget of wisdom, whether it's something existent or something of your own, something that will just help us that we can walk away with and say, yeah, here's what we can do to help in this deeply
If you got it, you got it.
All right, so Mother
Are you
Susan.
telling us that's fake time?
So Sue says if you spot it, you got
I
it.
gotta go.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Mother Sue. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Vince?
No, I pass.
You know, for me, really, I mean this very sincerely, this all comes out of our baptismal vow to respect the dignity of every human being. So I would say always choose dignity. I mean, literally, every conversation we have is an opportunity to do that in a culture that has forgotten dignity. So I always think to the degree that to which we can restore that for people, recognize that for people, appreciate and value that in people, that's how I think we heal the world.
Amen, sister.
Well, I would just, based on Sue's question, example of pain points, I think you could extend that to fear points.
Yes.
And my thought is, whenever you get into a discussion, try to get underneath it and find out what's driving.
Yeah, it's good. I hear two things from our conversation today that I think are worth us walking away with this morning. One is that the world is much more complex than we often allow it to be. Let's acknowledge the complexity. And number two, we are human beings. We are image bearers of God. Let's respect that in one another. So I'm sure you've got lots more questions and comments. Feel free to talk to them afterwards and just hold them up for the next hour. I'm sure they have nowhere to go. But thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your participation this morning. We'll see you next week.